Let me introduce you to the panel discussion of this day. We will have Jean Su, VP of Engineering at Range, a tool that helps teams stay in sync and work better together. Previously, she was a co-founder of Co-Leadership and a leadership development company for engineers and leaders in tech. SUZAN Bond is a certified leadership coach with over 15 years of hands-on experience and an educational background in psychology, organizational behavior, and community organizing. Her specialty is coaching technology leaders. And thirdly, but not lastly, Antoinette WEIBEL is a professor for human resources management at the University of St. Gallen and director of the Institute for Work and Employment Research at the University of St. Gallen. She does research in human resources, organizational studies, and organizational psychology. And with that said, let me welcome our panelists to this fabulous conversation. Hi there. While we were preparing for this panel, we had a lovely conversation, and I am so excited to have you here. The title of this panel is From Ancient Performance Management to Continuous Feedback and Expectation Management. But we had agreed on starting out by a little bit of a clarification so we can make sure that we are all on the same page together with our audience. So let's define what performance management is. What can be included in it and what's not part of it?
Okay. Who wants to go first?
Antoinette, take it away.
Take it away. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was the one who maybe started that all because I told you, let's burn performance evaluation, and that's part of it as well. So maybe if I put it in my terms, and then maybe we have it a little bit more traditional later, I would say performance management is all about defining what success will be together, then coach and learn together towards that success. Address the learnings, develop your team, and finally cheer together. That's, to me, performance management, but I'm quite clear this is not how it happens usually in the organizations.
SUZAN, would you like to share some more about how it happens in the corporate world?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting because I think performance management is a pretty expansive term. And I think it's about, for me, I actually love what Antoinette said. I'm like, how do I follow up that? But I think for me too, there's a piece between where the individual and the organization meets. And that's the place I'm really curious. And my whole background is, everything is all about like, where do they meet? And thinking about performance management, if you will, in ways that support both individuals and the company and not one at the expense of the other. And, I think the stereotype too is that often they are at the expense of the individual. But I think for me, it's like, how do you blend those two things to make sure that both needs are met?
Right. Jean, would you like to elaborate or perhaps give us a little glance at what performance management looks like at Range?
Sure. The way we do it at Range is very much aligned with what Antoinette said, where it's kind of coaching people towards mutual success for the individual and the company. We actually call our managers coaches just to make it a bit more explicit that the expectation in that role is to support and advocate and coach the people you're working with. And instead of performance management, so instead of some process where we, I'll share about our goal setting, our annual goal setting process. So when people hit their 1 year or their 2 year or 3 year on their yearly anniversary at Range, we kick off a process that we call annual goals. And there's 3 inputs into that process. The first is, or one of them is feedback from your team. So it's a very simple form, just what makes this person effective at Range? How can this person be more effective at Range? And the second piece of input is their personal self-reflection. So just a few prompts around, what they think has gone well over the past year, what are some things that they feel like could have gone better. And then the third is something we call role expectations. And this is really just like based on where they are in their career, do we feel like they're meeting or missing expectations? And we don't use exceeds, and we don't have this like five different criteria, because it makes people very anxious. And so just saying like, look, this is just a check, are you missing or are you meeting? Because if you're meeting, then we're going to kind of like create goals together and help you work towards them. If you're missing them, then the goal that you're going to be working on this year is to get you up to that level, right? And then beyond that process, beyond the initial goal setting process, what we do is we work with the coaches to make sure they know, it's not a one-time thing. Your job as a coach is to really keep these goals alive throughout the year. And so that's having quarterly check-ins, that's working with this teammate to make sure that they have the support and everything they need to really try to hit these goals. But at the same time, the goals are really for the individual. So if for some reason, we're in a pandemic, they have kids at home, they have a lot going on in their personal lives, or they just kind of are, tired of personal development at work, it's not something that we're judging them on, right? The whole process is entirely decoupled from, I guess, what you would call traditional performance management and how it's tied to their salaries and promotions.
Right. Thank you.
Maybe I just kind of follow that up a little bit, because this is now already the nice modern way we would also describe. So if we just, I'm a professor of human resource management, I also know the other thing, then it would be much more about targeting top down. So you get a lot of goals which are predefined. You would have almost no coaching during the year. You would have a harsh performance evaluation with 5 different grades, or even worse with ranking, and you would have bonuses. So we kind of really refrain from that, but I think this is still the reality of many organizations. To have kind of also...
Yeah, and I want to just add on to that too. I think I shared the story earlier when we all met, and I wanted to share it again too. When my experiences in traditional performance management, I think actually led me to want to go more into this field. I remember I'd started a job and I was working at the Gap at their headquarters in a buying office. And I got my first review and I had been killing it. I'd been working really hard and everyone acknowledged, you're doing really great. And I got my review and I got all 3s. So 1 to 5, it was straight 3s. And I was like, I'm not doing better at anything. And my manager, bless their heart, said, this is what we're supposed to do, is meet expectations so you get all 3s. And that's it. There was no differentiation between me or anybody else, or even between me and me, right? Am I doing these skills better or those skills better? Point me in a direction. Needless to say, I left the organization 6 months or 9 months later, because I felt as an employee, you don't see me at all. Are you really here for my growth? So I think that was really one of my early experiences around traditional performance management that made me say, oh, there has to be a better way.
Susan, I think that there's sort of the structure that is coming from the company, but even as a manager, you could say something like, look, I acknowledge this is not satisfying for you to be hearing. Yep. And let's put that aside. I also want to work with you to give you that feedback of what are you doing well? What have I seen from the last quarter to this quarter? And, what are the things you want to work towards and how can I support you towards that? That could have probably felt a lot better, right?
Yeah, absolutely, right. And the role of I think what you're pointing to, Jean, is the role of there's tools, and then there's how we administer those tools and how we manage and lead people. And I think that there's 2 sides to that, which is so important.
And not all companies are going to be more modern and progressive in their performance management structures, but individuals still have a lot of agency in how they deliver feedback and those things.
Mm-hmm.
So if we are at this section...
I
can't hear you.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
We can.
They can't hear me.
Hear you.
Okay.
There you are.
Yeah, perfect. So
You're back.
as I was saying, now that we are at this intersection, let's step back a little before we get to the tools and talk about, as you brought it up in our previous conversation, what's the point of performance management? Let's be on the same page. And if you could all share perhaps your performance management manifesto, maybe that could give our audience a little insight as to why this couple of words perhaps makes some people uncomfortable and how they can be rebranded to something more beneficial to the individual.
Well, I think that there are already quite a lot of questions, but I mean, I think Susan already pointed that out very nicely. And the main idea about performance management is to align individual performance and interests with organizational interests. And of course, you can do that in various ways. You can define success together, you can define the goals together, or you can go about it top down. You can have it more transparent so people can self-organize, or you have it less transparent. I mean, other ideas are that you also want to enable people to perform, give them opportunities, give them the abilities. We heard that very nice with the example that Jean was giving, and give people the information. How can I navigate better through this world? So these, to me, are main aspects of performance management, why we have that in the first place. And then, but that's something that Susan and Jean are probably going to elaborate on. I think then this distinction between instrument and acting the instrument as a leader, for instance, becomes very important if you have these two ideas in mind.
Yeah, and something Antoinette, I know you talked about too is, I think, I don't know if I have a manifesto. I'm like, wow, do I have a manifesto? Maybe I should have one. But if I have a thought about it, I don't know if I can say it's full thought out, and I feel like I should have a scroll or something. But Antoinette mentioned something earlier in some of our conversations. It's like, instead of feedback, feed forward. And I think that's such an important piece about performance management, that that we go back, like a lot of like the annual reviews is going backwards. And it's like, what about, okay, so we're in the past, but what about in the now and in the future? And how do we manage performance right now? How is performance managed in the moment, in every moment, in every one-on, not every one-on-one, but in every one-on-one, in those small things? I think Antoinette, we talked about, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, that to me would be the future, to really use everybody's strengths and think about how can we use that strengths better together, maybe even reshuffle how we work together in the team. So, I mean, the manifesto from my side would be to burn the traditional performance management, but I wasn't allowed to say that, but I just said it. It's out.
Yeah, I think because there's maybe insufficient training for managers, or there's not as much of a emphasis on coaching, I think people have a lot of association with performance management as, oh, it's that time of the year, we're going to get these surprises, like Suzanne, you were saying, getting those threes, like not having expectations of what the process is going to be like and what the intention is behind it. And the way I see it is more like, how can people not be surprised? If you do have these processes, they should be kind of checkpoints, but people shouldn't be surprised by any means, right? I just did kind of the kickoff or the input phase for someone for annual goals, and it was very much aligned with what he was already thinking about, what's already been coming up in our one-on-ones. And so it shouldn't be a surprise, because if someone is not meeting expectations, it should be something that is already being worked on, not like, oh, now I have to like stack rank everyone and then give the bottom, third of people bad news.
Well, again, go ahead, Antoinette. Well, I should say something really quick, too, that I think that when we get disconnected, Jean, as you're saying too, I think then people look at performance reviews as punitive, and they're like bracing themselves, like, what's going to happen? And there's like this anxiety, and that's just a terrible way to go into any conversation. But I think that's the dangers. They can become punitive and why people don't like them, but there shouldn't be a surprise. And if there is a surprise, then that's a key, right? That your communication, there's a disconnect.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, there's, as I found out, even rolling out this new process, there's a lot of scar tissue around. I mean, we don't even use the term performance management, right? We use like, it's completely separate from performance management. But people are like, oh, I'm reading that, I'm feeling a little bit anxious because at my previous company, you set goals, but they're really like the goals you should set, not actual goals you want to work towards. And so people just have layers on layers of, negative connotations around this stuff, unfortunately.
Yeah, but I think, that unfortunately brings us a little bit back to the system, but because first of all, you said met or not met. And it's interesting that even this is difficult, but I think this is much easier. How the hell can I evaluate somebody on a 5-degree scale if it's about knowledge work or it's about teamwork? I mean, it's also kind of, we are asking too much because nobody really can evaluate that. So I also understand in a sense the leaders in that case. And the other thing is, I think you really separated it as well. So you really see it differently. People have their own goals and their meaningful goals. And that's a big difference to have like the yearly goal, which is declined top down. So, I mean, you cannot separate that completely. I think also in a traditional system, many leaders are themselves under pressure because they're subject to the same performance management. So it's a mixture, isn't it? It's both it's having better tools, but also leaders who are trained and who know about coaching and a good trusting psychological safety atmosphere where you dare to speak and all that kind of stuff, probably.
Mm-hmm. With that said, we talked some.
Oh, there you go. You're good.
All right, so we talked some about coaching and aligning values. How does that come into play with more traditional methods of engaging with our colleagues, like bonuses? What's your opinion about tying that into performance management?
Okay, bonuses do not work. That's definitely the case, because bonuses crowd out intrinsic motivation. Bonuses lead to that people concentrate for where the carrot is on and forget about the rest. So bonuses only work for what they were invented for. That's very simple, straightforward tasks. There you can work with bonuses, but I wouldn't use that for anything else. I also don't see the point. You should just pay people enough, as Dan Pink says, and then the issue is off the table, and I like that. Yeah, so, I'm being very authoritarian here, so maybe you like bonuses and chip in, please.
Yeah, the only place I've been working at a bunch of startups since I started my career at Google, and my only association with bonuses is people wait to get their bonuses before they leave the company, right? Like that's kind of, right, you kind of expect it. You're like, oh, I'm going to get my bonus in whatever, January. And so it's like, oh, it's September. I better just kind of hold on for a few more months.
Yep.
That's a nice one.
How sad. So the question here is that if bonuses don't work, and let's say that's a given, whether or not we are authoritarian, what would you suggest to use to gauge the performance on the job? How can we just make sure that people will be feeling appreciated if they do the work?
I think, just off the top of my head, like telling people you appreciate them, notice the things that they're doing. I mean, it seems so basic, but like, I think a lot of times we miss out on that, right? Saying, hey, I noticed you've gone, since the time I've been here, you've gone from like, taking on this type of work. And now you're really, taking on really large projects, coordinating with, several different teams. And like, that this is a really, really meaningful step towards where you want to get to, and like acknowledging people, what they want to get to, like where they want to grow, helping them see how they're making steps towards that. I feel like very few people, unfortunately, very few people have that in their workplace. And it's something that people will stay at a company for if they feel like they have a manager that has those skills.
Yeah, I was going to say too, I really think that it comes down to career development. I think career development is such a bigger lever than bonuses because people want to learn and grow. You know, you think about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Daniel Pink, Drive, I believe. I'm like, my brain just snapped on that. But people they want to grow and learn. And so I think it's about giving people, it's exactly what you said, Jean. It's like giving them career development opportunities, like appreciating what they've done, and then giving them more opportunities to grow and to learn. And it's funny because I think people, it might sound counterintuitive, but the people I've worked with in my experiences as a director of career development and as a COO, people wanted more the opportunities to learn and grow and develop new things. The money less so, as you know, obviously once we're at a certain level, they wanted the opportunities. So I think that's what I would replace. You know what I mean? Not if I would replace bonuses with, but I think that's where I would put my emphasis.
Right. Yeah. One of the things I talk to people about when I start working with them is like, look, we're not going to be at this company the rest of our lives, right? Like it becomes very taboo to talk about like, oh, what do you do when you leave? Because people are like, oh, are you thinking of leaving? You know, people start to take it personally. But I like to make it like super clear. Look, we're not going to be here forever. Like, what is it you want to get out of your time here? And let's help you get that. Like, what's the narrative you want to have about, you know, your career and how this role fits into it? What's the blurb you want on your LinkedIn? Is it that you like led these sorts of projects? And then let's help you get there. And even if then like, for example, maybe the role and what this person wants is not a perfect fit, they'll still stay because they feel like you understand them, you know what they want, and that you're on their side.
I think leadership at the job itself, as you both say, is the most important. And maybe a little bit love and compassion. I think that's also quite nice and helps because people are leaving bosses and not really for money, for instance. So, I mean, there I think you could also do a little bit more like having a nice emotional atmosphere in your team. That would be helpful.
Right.
It goes so far.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. We had some previous presentations, mostly yesterday, and some of them mentioned love and compassion just the same, and I completely and wholeheartedly agree with you. However, if we have some more data orientation and system orientation, what kind of systems would you put in place that are aligned with this new kind of performance management per se?
Well, I think in framing this, I already talked a little bit about this. It's much more defining goals together or defining success together. I think participation, empowerment in the goal is important already. And you want to have people that, I mean, as you say, that they can grow. So they have to really be able to think together, to bring in their own ideas. Then you want to have maybe more peer coaching as well. I mean, it's great to have a supervisor who is coaching, but it would be great if the team itself, if the colleagues itself would really coach each other. And then I believe instead of performance evaluation, really just find out how you as a team can get better, do team development. And that would be fine for me. That would be the perfect performance management because that would really lead to better organizational performance. And that's what we want in the end.
Yeah, I think you captured it, Antoinette. Like, yes.
I love that.
I think you know more detailed tools than I know, and I think that would be interesting. So I'm not the tool specific person probably.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of tools around. Like I don't know if this is what the question meant, but like there's a lot of data driven tools that are there's some news around Microsoft or something, but like tools that are more around like monitoring and tracking productivity. And I think that, I mean, it depends on the framing. Like if it's like, oh, I want to see it, or I want to be able to like see my progress. But I think you have to be really careful when you get around those tools because the default reaction is just like strong aversion. Like, I don't want to be monitored, right? People are like, oh, how do you know people are working when they're remote? Like, how do you know they're working when they're in the office, right? Like, it's I think you have to really think that most of that stuff tends to be like pretty low trust is the default reaction. So I don't know if that was what you're asking about, but that's my immediate reaction for that.
Mm-hmm. Now, if you're talking about these tools, you have to be really careful. I mean, you can use tech, but that really has to be, again, for team learning. But it should, I mean, if you use it for really monitoring performance of individuals, then it's very quickly just producing even ill-being. You produce burnout, you produce really a lot of things you don't want to have, in my opinion, if you're a good employee.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of the problem too is that the challenge for me is like, you don't want to be tool led. You want to be strategy led. Like, what's the culture you want to create? What's the team culture you want to create? So I think that then you can understand, what data do I need to collect, if any? What tools do I need to collect, if any? But, you know, I think that's where we start. It's like, if you're looking at tools first, you've sort of lost sight, you know, the forest for the trees. Like, you've sort of lost sight of what's really important. And then it's going to be, you're going to drive a culture, I think, that, to Jean's point, is going to be lower trust and maybe even more antagonistic between, you know, managers and the team. So I think for me, it's about tools are a secondary choice about how do we get there, you know, after we've decided what it is that we want to do.
Right. Yeah, I think if you do use tools, you just want to make sure the intention is really clear around them, like, and make sure that what is being put in place is rewarding what you want to reward, right? So I'm on an engineering team, right? If we roll out some tool that's like, hey, every week we're gonna, you know, look at your productivity based on number of pull requests merged. Well, guess what? Everyone's going to start merging a lot of like small pull requests and putting their effort towards like amplifying that number arbitrarily, really. And that's not really any sort of measure of productivity.
And I think you would probably not do that if you had trust in the first place. I mean, trust is a really important variable here. But on the other hand, if you want to kind of use some of these tools and they fit to your philosophy, and you do it in a trust-based instance, you still have to be very careful, because I think they can be very powerful, but you always have to see that these tools are still very enabling for people, so that they see that it makes their life easier. And not that it's more seen, whatever, as a nuisance, for instance, or as intruding their privacy. So you just have to be very, very mindful by using these data-driven tools.
Yeah, and I do think, to get back to the original thing too, thinking about this further, you know, data, it's not to say data is not important or good, because I think sometimes data can be important. And for me, you know, as a leader, I would always think about it at the department level and driving, you know, at the department level. So it's then dependent upon me as the leader to then figure out, how do we get those things done, but how are we driving as a department, you know, forward? Are we meeting the kind of goals that we want to meet? And again, what are the goals that we want to set? So I think for me, data goes at the higher level rather than at an individual contributor level, personally.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. We are having another question. How much and how do you involve self-awareness into performance management?
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, it's probably about self-reflection. You probably have that once you really say we go towards finding out, how can I use my strengths better? You have to find out, what are your strengths? So that's already a very important exercise for self-reflection, and you can do that with several techniques. And then you have to think, what are the conditions that I can use these strengths? How can I bring that into the team? And I think there you are already in a very deep self-reflective manner and bring that into the teams. That would be my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I was going to say that I think it's definitely very helpful if you can help people get into that reflective state, like, you know, maybe leading into any sort of, review or feedback process to do a bit of coaching around like, what do they think has gone well, or like, what are the things they may want to work on, without the input of like, oh, these are the things you could work on. Because once people have thought about it and they've kind of independently come to the conclusion of like, oh, like I really want to work towards, being a better tech lead, or, I think maybe this is an area that I could work on. I feel a little bit uncomfortable there. Then when you do have actual feedback of like, those are actual growth opportunities, they don't feel like what people consider negative feedback, right? It's like, yes, these, let me help you work on the things that you want to work on. Here's what I've noticed. And these are the next steps.
Yeah, I agree with what both of you said too. For me, any sort of system, self-reflection needs to be actually at the center of any performance management, any sort of system. I call it like career development, career growth. It has to be at the center of it, because that's how we learn and grow, right? If we don't reflect upon what are we doing, then we miss an opportunity to grow. And that's, I think, for me, what the purpose of a lot of this is to grow individually and as a team and as a company. So
I think it lets the process be much more driven by the individual who's growing too, right? Rather than like,
yep,
hey, last quarter you got a performance review that said you weren't doing well in these things. I'll give you an update, next year if that's still true or not, and if it's problematic, right? You're giving the person agency to say, hey, these are the things I want to work on. And in our process, we have actually like, who are the people you want to ask for support from, and like, what is the type of support you want from that person? So they can then go say, hey, like, while we're working on a project together, please keep in mind that I'm working on this. And so if you have any feedback for me about it, like, I'd really appreciate it, which obviously makes it a lot easier for that person to give them feedback. So I think it just kind of flips the script a little bit and makes it more driven by the person. And so, of course, then feedback is better received, and maybe not even considered feedback, right? They may just consider it people helping them.
Yeah, and it reminds me too, so I've done a lot of work with StrengthsFinder and the positive psychology movement, which is moving, in the past we were looking, a lot of performance management was about leveling everybody up and everybody kind of being the same, which to Jean's point, that there's not agency and empowerment in that. It's like, are we all automatons? Are we all these bots basically? And I think where things are moving, and a lot of like the movement of the positive psychology movement is more like, I think to Jean's point, like I'm working on this, so I might really become great at this thing and I might not be great at another thing. And that's okay, that we can sort of specialize or be our unique selves. And when we drive it from the human being, from the individual contributor, to Jean's point, then we get more of that and we get a richer experience. And I think honestly, we get people who are more likely to stay because they're growing as a human being and not just as like this work robot.
And we get better organization performance because they are performing in abundance. But I'm just kind of, maybe for whoever is listening, because we were told we have to give concrete instruments, you might, because it's just from positive organizational scholarship, you might like the reflected best self. That's even for free. You can Google that and find it on the internet. And that's a real nice exercise. And you can do that then together with a peer in the team and compose your picture out of it. And from then do all the work that Susan and Jean were saying, like, how can I find somebody in the team who is my buddy, and kind of bringing that better into the team. So there's so many nice tools out there, and some are even for free. So that's really nice.
Would you repeat the name of the tool that you just mentioned?
That's the reflected best self.
Awesome.
I know a lot of the conversation is around, like positivity and coaching, but that's not to say that there's going to be things that you need to talk about. And I had this someone I worked with who a while ago, and he was really combative in meetings. And it was really the one thing that I felt like, otherwise he was super smart, really when he wasn't triggered was really quite pleasant to work with. And so there are going to be times when, it's not just like, oh, work on whatever you want, I'll support you, right? There are going to be areas where they're actually like not doing well and they really need to hear that feedback. And the way I delivered that to him was, I sat him down, I said, I'm really excited to work with you, like for these reasons. I remember reading this thing you wrote and, it was really out of the box and I was really impressed with it. And I wanted to share something with you because I feel like, there's something I've noticed that I feel like is maybe the one thing that's holding you back from progressing in your career. And it's that this is the behavior I'm seeing in meetings. And I think the impact is that people feel really tense around you. I've noticed a meeting that people have come up to me later and been kind of distressed. And this is the impact on the team. And like, let me know if I can help you in any way. And so he actually received that feedback really, really well. And then later I heard he was like, oh, Jean's really good at giving feedback. And no one had really given him that feedback. Like he had given him that feedback and maybe gotten some slaps on the wrist, but not to that degree of like really letting it sink in.
Yeah, but that's like two things. You need to have this feed forward, which is more strengths oriented. And of course you also need but I mean, another tip there, sorry that I'm kind of making a tip machine here. Marcus Buckingham, with his feedback fallacy, he has, you have put it so nicely, but if people can't remember that all, he has kind of written it down, how you're giving that type of feedback. So in a very, I see it from my perspective and, that different type of in the instant giving a feedback if you see something at which at least doesn't ring a bell for you. So I think that's important as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then framing it in this is something we taught a lot at co-leadership for engineers and how to give feedback is like really framing it in the positive intent, right? Like I'm sharing this with you because I want to work better together. And it has to actually be a genuine positive intent, not the sort of like, I know what people have called the shit sandwich. Like you say something positive and then get the feedback and then kind of
don't do that.
Sandwich it
You need
together.
love, see, Jean? You need love. That's what you need as well.
Okay.
You can only give it in a positive intent if you have positive emotions floating around. So you need to have that ingrained as well.
I think to Jean's point, I just want to, I'm glad you brought this up, Jean, because I think as much as we want to allow people to empower people and grow, it doesn't mean you're never going to have hard conversations. And I think that for me, what I notice when I'm working with leaders is that hard conversations are still hard, even as I work with VPs and C-suite. And that I think that's one of the best things that you can do as a manager or a leader is to work on your own skills and having hard conversations. Because I think sometimes what happens is we can do this sort of binary. We're like, oh, we shy away from it. Oh, but I don't really mean it. Oh, but you're great. Or we go hard, because we wait and we wait and wait, and we're really hard. And we don't do what I think Jean talked about, which is sort of that positive intent and framing it. I think there's a lot that managers and leaders can do to develop their own skills around having hard conversations, because everyone's heart rate goes up in a hard conversation.
But I also have to say there might be a little bit of a cultural issues. I think in the US, you're really good in saying some things like you're great. We're not so good, at least in the Germanic countries. We say, if you say nothing, then it's saying you're great. So, I think in our countries, we need to practice you're great a little bit more. But I completely agree that you need to be able to do the other thing as well.
Both sides of it, right? Like having a balance around what is the hard conversation? Because saying you're great might be a hard conversation.
For many people, it is, yeah.
And the company I was a COO for was German based, so I understand that sort of like there are cultural things for sure.
So if we are at hard conversations, perhaps there are some managers here who are really trying to engage in this kind of leadership and performance management, but perhaps their direct reports are not entirely comfortable sharing their goals, or they haven't thought about their goals, or they are not as proactive and vibrant about achieving their own goals within the company. How would you help these leaders? What kind of techniques could they put into place to engage these colleagues a little more in their own personal development?
I guess some very tactical tips that I found useful, because yeah, I've definitely talked to people and like, they kind of freeze up when you're like, what do you look, where do you think you want to be in 3 to 5 years? Like, oh, should I have a plan? They kind of freak out. And one thing I found worked well is, especially at a larger company where there's other people higher up that they look up to, is to maybe say like, there's like a wide range of different leaders. Is there one person or type that you're drawn to? Because that's a little bit more concrete. And so they can see like, oh, this person's kind of a tech lead manager and that role kind of really appeals to me. So that can be a little bit of a more concrete tip for how to talk about where people want to grow in one-on-ones.
Yeah,
one more. Another one is sometimes people they just don't know. And so when you offer them up options, just giving them options, right? So instead of saying, well, what do you want to work on next? Saying, hey, here are some of the projects that are coming up, and then seeing what they're drawn to. Some people need to see options before they can really choose something.
I love those. I think this is a really good role for coaching, and coaching, traditionally draws on questions for those of you who, are less familiar. I think even simple, and I think you're right. It's too confronting sometimes. Like, what do you want is such a powerful question. And sometimes we're like, I have no idea. And it can shut somebody down. And I think I love those. Jean, I'm totally going to borrow those. But I think I also like questions like, well, where did you get lost and like excited in something where you just like, you spent the whole day and you couldn't stop? What were you doing in that moment? Or what was a project that you were like, oh, I dreaded it. And why did you dread it? What were you dreading about it? That can give us begin to seed the conversation and get them going, get a little bit of like moss going so they can roll down that hill a little bit easier to warm them up. And I do think there's value sometimes in saying sometimes some people just don't know what they don't want to do. They don't know what they want to do, but like even starting with what do you dislike, I think can help seed that conversation a bit. So questions.
Pick up on that because I really love it. I mean, there is another technique which is called feed-forward interview. And I sometimes do this with managers which never have had any coaching experience. And it starts exactly with what you're doing. I mean, you would ask people, when was the last time when you had a flow, when you were really proud and were full of joy? And also it was a success for you. And then you have people just talking about this. And I mean, the only thing you have to train a manager is that he shuts up. So we all have to learn that. I mean, it's very hard for professors as well. And then you sit together and try to find out, okay, what were the strengths you were using in that moment? And what did you need for really using that strength? For instance, that was a tight deadline. Some people perform better if there is a tight deadline, whereas others, I hate deadlines. So you kind of then can analyze it very, very easily. What do you need? And then you can just say, okay, now you have an idea. In 2 weeks, you come back and bring a new goal out of that. And that's such an easy thing. You can really do that with everybody. It's even written down somewhere. So you can Google feed-forward interview. And so easy. And it's just taking up what you were just saying, Susan. So it's a very nice technique.
Yeah, Antoinette, I just want to say, I love that you say like the shut up piece too, because I think it's like really being curious. Like, I think we're used to like, I have to tell people as a manager or leader, I have to tell them things and I need to drive something. And there is a delicate balance between how do we drive something forward, but also empower people at the same time. And so I think like zip your mouth, and be really curious, be really open without agenda about how am I going to get this project done, but just that it's like a bit of what I call self-management, managing ourselves in that process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know we're talking a lot about coaching and that's because that's sort of our backgrounds or, partly our backgrounds, but for someone who doesn't have coach training or, don't be intimidated, right? Like there are, you can look up feed forward. They're like, even just having 4 or 5 questions that you bring up and say, hey, I just want to spend a bit of time, taking a step back from the day to day and just like have a conversation around what's going well and maybe looking forward a little bit. And then just some basic skills around the shutting up, and then also like asking open-ended questions, just like, tell me more about that. Don't talk about your own stories, but just telling, having them basically keep talking. There's a few basic skills around that. And I think, that's really all you need to get people talking who are maybe a little bit less forward thinking naturally.
And just occurs to me, as you said, Susan, be genuinely interested. What do you do if you want to have a job? I always try to fall in love with the university I was applying to, because I was much better in the talks if before I found out what I love about this university. And that's the same you have to do for your whatever talks you're doing. You just find out, and don't take it literally, but in another sense, what would me make fall in love with that person? And then all of a sudden you are much more interested, because there are always things that you can find you like about people. And I think that's so important for these talks as well.
Yeah, I want to say one last thing too that Jean said. I'm sorry. I think, Jean, what you made is an important point too about coaching. For me, coaching, it shouldn't feel intimidating, and I think that's a really good point. I think that it's like coaching as an approach. It's like how we approach people rather than just a title or a set of skills. And I think Jean gave everyone a wonderful way of being a coach. It's about being curious, asking open-ending questions, and detaching ourselves as much as possible, even as manager and leader, from other people. But I think it's a coaching as approach, not just you have to have a whole bunch of skills. It's a great point, Jean.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about how perhaps performance management is changing in this new era of remote or distributed work. Can you give us any tips in how to better manage performance when we don't have the day-to-day coffee, kitchen, hallway interactions with our colleagues?
Yeah, I think I can speak to a little bit. I've noticed that since, the pandemic started, back, I don't know how many months ago it's been now, but, let's just say March of this year was when, for many of us, depending on where you were, maybe it was January or February, I noticed I noticed more of my leaders talking to me about there's more sort of like harder conversations and performance issues. I'm going to put performance issues because my sense is that sometimes what's happened is the leader, they skipped some of those conversations. And I think part of it is I've had my folks say, okay, take a look back at like, how did you have the conversation before and what's missing? A lot of times they were like, well, I would have a conversation over coffee, or we would walk and talk, and now I can't do that anymore. Now it feels formal and serious. So I think part of it is assessing, how do I give feedback and like what's different about it now? And how can I adjust things in the moment, and what can I do to make it to blend it into that everyday conversation rather than again waiting and making it a big deal. I think a lot of them are like, what? But if I put this on the calendar, and how do I do it? I'm like, just use it in your one-on-one. Ask a really interesting question, like, tell me about this, or So I think that it's like, I think folks have to step back and look at how are they doing it and what falls apart. It sounds basic, but I think it's pretty simple. Like, oh, wait, what do I have to do differently now? And what are small incremental ways I can shift my style of offering feedback?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you definitely want to keep that channel open. One thing I've done with everyone I have one-on-ones with is offered them phone one-on-ones, because I feel like people get a lot of Zoom fatigue. It can feel awkward to just be one-on-one and like, have to think about how you look and, your facial expression and you might feel like you have to say something. And so I've, for most of my one-on-ones, I put on headphones and a mask and go for a walk. And then, people feel a little bit more free to think openly. And most people after doing one have decided to like default to walking one-on-ones. And it's just nice to get out of the house.
Right.
Yeah, I coach, by the way. I coach with camera off. I coach on Zoom and I coach with camera off, and I have forever. And people are like, what? I'm like, because I don't want to arrange my face. I don't want you to have to arrange your face and worry about being perfect. I want us to have freedom. So I think that's an amazing, tip. Like to give that, because it's exhausting, isn't it? People are, Zoom fatigue is real.
Yeah, if you want to lay down for the conversation, you want to kick your feet up, like do whatever you need to do to feel comfortable.
Well, there is, I think Novartis has now, for the next 2 weeks, decided not to use any video conferences any longer for that probable reason you were saying, Zoom fatigue. So you can do it even this way. But I mean, do you really use your one-on-ones again for performance issues in these times, or in these times, isn't it more about feeling how people are? I think I would even say in these times, people perform enough. That's what I have seen. So we don't have to be worried. They're really doing superwomen, superman stuff out there. So all what we have to do as leader is offering support and maybe sometimes also an open ear, because it's difficult to have homeschooling going on at the same time. So for me, it's not so much about performance management at present, but really like supporting each other.
Right.
Yeah, I think I would add to that when I say two performance issues, I think sometimes we can think about like the job that someone's doing, but what I'm noticing is when I'm talking about performance issues from some of the leaders, it's folks who are actually having behavioral, you know what I mean? They're struggling with stress. And so they're lashing out at their fellow employees, you know, so it's more those kinds of things, which to me, again, is, are we to your point, Antoinette, are we offering enough support? Are we supporting people under these extraordinarily difficult times? Are we offering them enough, you know, support mentally and emotionally and socially, you know what I mean? Not just around the job they're doing.
Yeah, I think the lines really blur, right? If someone has young kids at home, as I do, right, like the one-on-one, maybe asking them how they're doing. And if they're saying they're really struggling with the balance, you know, talking to them about like, okay, what are ways we can support you? What's worked for you in the past? And helping them come up with some strategies to like balance their work and their work and home lives, which are basically one thing right now. And then it's not I guess, you know, they wouldn't consider like, oh, I just had a performance conversation with my manager, but it's all kind of intermixed.
As we are approaching the end of our conversation, I would love to have you share your best tips and tricks. We heard a lot, and I don't know that we can stress this enough, about listening and giving people space and supporting the employees that we manage and making sure that everybody's kind of finding some safety in the uncertain times that we have right now. But what would you like to share with our audience if they want to, as Antoinette said, burn their traditional performance management sheets? What tips would you like to share with us?
I think for me, I would say just take a look at your systems and see if they're rewarding what you want them to reward, right? Because if you have a system in place that's tied to salary or promotions or anything like that, people are going to optimize, right? People are going to play the system and they're going to play the game. And is it rewarding the things you want to reward? And if it's not, and you're in a position to iterate on it, to change it, you know, think about how you can make changes that do reward the things you want to reward. And if you feel like you're not in a position, like, you know, say you're at a, you know, hundreds of thousands of people company and you're kind of first-time manager, if you feel like you're not in a position to do that, think about how you can still approach the conversations you're having with people to support them and separate from the systems you do have to be involved in.
Yeah, and I want to jump on, Jean, to what you said too. Is I love what you said, and building on that, my guess is that some of you are going to discover that your systems are not rewarding what you want to be rewarding. That's just my guess. It happens all the time, more than we might think. I think it's also about, don't overwhelm yourself thinking you have to change the whole system. Like takes, you know what I mean? Like, oh my gosh, it's terrible, trash it all. That's hard. And especially right now when people are already taxed, I think it's like maybe picking like, what's the most important lever? What's the smallest thing that I can do to start changing it? And what's the thing where I want us to go, and start moving in small ways. I don't think you have to like throw away the whole thing. It's like that whole, I love this old idiom, like, how do you eat an elephant? Bite by bite. You know, don't try to eat that whole elephant. Just take small steps towards that.
And that's almost such a nice way to end, but I'm going to open it again. Sorry about that. I would say, learn to trust, find genuine interest in your team. Be patient, because it takes some time till you kind of really find a way together, and then change the system together. That would be my idea.
That's a nice
Love
way
that.
of ending too. Yeah, change the system together is really awesome. Thank you for being with us. I think this has been a really excellent conversation, full of just great tips, and thank you for sharing those, because we can all, you know, try to incorporate one more thing and see if it works for us. Before we thank you, I just like to give you a chance, because this is not a presentation, just to share where can our audience follow your work or get in touch with you if they would like to.
LinkedIn.
All right.
Sure. Yeah, LinkedIn, or I'm also on Twitter, JYHSU.
Yep. I am Susan Bond all over the internet. So if you put my name in, you're going to find me with a Z. You're just going to find me. I like own the first couple pages. So I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn. I have my own site. I write on Medium. So that's the best way to find me.
Thank you so much.
I'm not going to ask you what's the name of your husband is. I'm just not doing it, because you heard that joke all over, didn't you?
With that, I would like to show you what we have for you. This is Antoinette on a mug, and we will send this to you as soon as we can. And I would love the camera to stay on my face, because we have another mug. This is Suzanne Bond.
That's me. I got the bangs.
That's you. And we also have a Jean Sue mug. This is just a little thank you. This is just a little thank you from us to you. This has been a great conversation. I'd like to encourage our audience to show their feelings in the chat, their support. I saw some claps, and people love the walking one-on-ones, and I think this has been great. Thank you so much for staying with us.